This is the city of fountains. It's estimated that there are over 250 fountains here. There are fountains that were built here in the late 1800s. There are fountains in parks, on boulevards, in subdivisions, corporations, and private residencies. There are fountains large and majestic to small and whimsical. There are fountains built here and fountains that were purchased elsewhere and brought here. There are wall fountains, pedestal fountains, drinking fountains, grotto fountains, cascade fountains, atrium fountains, memorial fountains. There's Neptune, god of the sea, led by 3 powerful horses. Just a block away, Bacchus, god of wine, looks down from his grapevine-wrapped pedestal upon a captive audience of nymphs and satyrs. Nearby, the beautiful goddess Pomona poses with a cluster of grapes in a sun-drenched courtyard. There's fountains dedicated to children, Eagle Scouts, firefighters, women, wars, philanthropists. There are lions and penguins and frogs and boars and mermaids. Oh my! Yes, there are fountains all over this city. No, we're not talking about Rome. This is Kansas City, the city of fountains.
And there are more fountains in and around Kansas City than there are anywhere else in the world except for Rome. We're here at one of my favorites, the Meyer Seahorse Fountain, located at Meyer and Ward Parkway. We'll investigate this one later in this show, but first, let's take a trip across town to Kansas City's oldest working fountain, the Women's Leadership Fountain. We're going to be visiting many of the fountains around town, but this is a great one to start with. We're here at 9th Street and the Paseo in Kansas City to take a look at the Women's Leadership Fountain. It's the oldest working fountain in Kansas City. It was first called the 9th Street Fountain, designed by George Kessler and John Van Brunt, and was completed and dedicated in 1899. This is actually the second fountain built in Kansas City. As for the first fountain built in Kansas City, it's no longer here. We'll investigate that one later in the show.
The Women's Leadership Fountain is the oldest working fountain in Kansas City. It's located at 9th and Paseo. The inspiration for the fountain came from George Kessler, a historic landscape architect. He approached the city of Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Recreation Board architect John Van Brunt in 1889 to design a 9th Street fountain that would be the entry piece for the Paseo Boulevard, which was under construction. Together they decided on a simple oval design with a limestone basin with nozzles in the center of the basin's pool where water shoots up in the air. The fountain was surrounded by a raised sidewalk, floor garden, gas lamps, and a balustrade that cost $4,115 to construct. In the 1940s, the fountain stopped working, but it was repaired in 1970 and again in 1990. The renovations in the 1990s was possible through the Central Exchange, who led efforts to raise the $125,000 needed to properly restore the fountain. For the Central Exchange's efforts, the fountain was renamed the Women's Leadership Fountain and was dedicated to 13 notable women who had made important and long-lasting contributions to the city. This restoration did not hold, and in January 2008, restoration of the fountain began again. The Central Exchange came together with Kansas City Parks and Recreation, Ollie Gates, and several other prominent Kansas Cityans to raise $1.3 million for a complete restoration, including the foundation, fountains plumbing, and Meyer and Fitzsimmons monuments close by. Vanham Construction was hired as a general contractor and quickly brought in Hoffman Cortez, Susan Richards Johnson, and Associates Incorporated to revive this historic fountain. In February 2009, a dedication ceremony was held and the Women's Leadership Fountain flowed once more. Now, this all sounds a lot simpler than it was. In reality, the Women's Leadership Fountain was a very complex project. The team that renovated the fountain in 1970 replaced several damaged pieces with cast stone, and those replacements were deteriorated to a point of no repair. The owner, Parks and Recreation, wanted the fountain restored to the original 107-year-old fountain using Indiana limestone.
Indiana limestone is noted as being the highest quality quarried limestone in the United States and was also used in the Empire State Building and the Pentagon. Many of the decorative elements of the fountain were difficult to duplicate.
The solution to these difficult problems, Chuck Shammer with Hoffman Cortez recalled using this high-end material on previous projects and knew exactly what to do. First, he contacted Sturgis Materials to locate a quarry that produced this type of limestone that matched exactly the remaining pieces of the fountain. Next, Hoffman Cortez and Susan Richards Johnson found a fabricator that could produce finny holes and decorative pieces almost identical to the original ones. The project team wanted the fountain to look as seamless as possible. They demolished select pieces of the fountain and then incorporated the salvaged pieces back into the fountain. Once this was finished, they replaced the balustrade system and the fountain was once again running.
Amazingly, the Women's Leadership Fountain was delivered under budget and on time, making a very happy owner. Through creativity and resourcefulness, the oldest working fountain in Kansas City runs once more. Now, I have a particular interest in one of the names associated with the fountain, Myrtle Page Fillmore. I had a relative named Myrtle June Page, an aunt on my father's side, who also lived in Kansas City. My father was born and raised in Kansas City along with 7 other brothers and sisters. Is it possible that I have a family connection to this fountain? Well, it turns out no. Myrtle was an adopted name for Mary Carolyn Page from Pagetown, Ohio. We'll discover more about her and the other 12 women at a later time.
We now arrive at the J.C. Nichols Memorial Fountain. The J.C. Nichols Memorial Fountain is Kansas City's best loved, best known, and most frequently photographed fountain. In 1952, the first steps towards its creation was made when son Miller Nichols initiated the purchase of the McKay Estate Fountain with the help of an art broker in New York called French & Company, which told him about the fountain. The fountain was purchased and brought to Kansas City. The McKay Estate was part of the Gold Coast of Long Island, which was a favorite summer resort for the wealthy. The construction of their grand mansion spanned a period from the late 1880s to around 1929. Some of the personalities who had structures built included F.W. Woolworth, Alfred DuPont, Harry F. Guggenheim, and William Vanderbilt. This area inspired F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel, The Great Gatsby. Clarence McKay, whose Rosalind estate was called Harbor Hill, was a leading industrialist. In 1928, he concluded an astute business deal merging his commercial companies with the International Telephone and Telegraph Company,
ITT.
A good part of his fortune was devoted to support the arts and sciences. McKay followed the formal European landscape tradition of fountains and statues, and a monumental fountain was commissioned to become the focal point of his garden. The bronze group for the fountain was created by French artist
Henri Léon Gribet
in 1910 and consisted of 4 equestrian figures placed around a 2-tiered basin. Smaller groups of children riding dolphins were placed between the mounted figures. The water effects of the fountain was especially dramatic. A central vertical jet of water was propelled some 30 feet in the air, and the auxiliary figures spewed a stream of water toward the center. This fountain functioned as a dramatic water showcase for his fountain and estate. The McKay Estate has long since been destroyed, but this fountain has survived and now resides in Kansas City. Jesse Clyde Nichols, better known as J.C. Nichols, was born August 23, 1880, in Olathe, Kansas. He received a degree from the University of Kansas and earned a scholarship to study at Harvard University, where he studied economics and land development. A year later, when Nichols returned to Kansas City, he was ready to get busy. He began his adventures in Kansas and later converged his operations to both sides of the border of Kansas and Missouri. Jesse Clyde Nichols and his company are responsible for the creation of some of Kansas City's best-loved landmarks. In addition to the monumental construction of the Country Club Plaza, which is the country's first shopping center built for automobile travel, Nichols was involved in the creation of the Liberty Memorial, the Kansas City Art Institute, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, the Midwest Research Institute, the North American Aviation Aircraft Plant that paved the way for the General Motors Fairfax plant that stands at the same location today, as well as the development of Kansas City University, now called University of Missouri at Kansas City, UMKC. Nichols' life work was real estate development. By the late 1930s, the Nichols Company had acquired control of more than 4,000 acres of land and had molded sizable portions of Kansas City into a creation of his imagination. He was building subdivisions in Kansas and Missouri with his method he called planning for permanence. His objective was to develop whole residential neighborhoods that would attract people who desired a better way of life, a nicer place to live, and would be willing to work in order to keep it.
In reality, his planning for permanence was a covenant which required deed restrictions that included the restrictions on renting to the undesirable blacks, Jews, and Catholics. In time, Nichols changed his policy on Jews and Catholics, but blacks were never allowed to own or reside in these neighborhoods unless they were servants. As a result of these policies, high property values, and demographic trends, places like Country Club District and Mission Hills remain largely white, even though a U.S. Supreme Court decision, Shelley v. Kramer in 1948, ruled racially restrictive deed restrictions and covenants unconstitutional.
The criticisms of Nichols notwithstanding, he was an extremely powerful and influential shaper of Kansas City. Some of the many fountains Nichols is responsible for creating in Kansas City are the J.C. Nichols Memorial Fountain, Mirror Pool on Ward Parkway, Myers Circle Fountain, Neptune Fountain, Four Fonds, Boy and Frog, Allen Memorial Fountain, Seville Light Fountain, Bacchus, Diana, and Pomona Fountains. J.C. Nichols, the man who the fountain is dedicated to, had done much to create a Kansas City that is famed for its profusion of sculptures and fountains. The impact Nichols had on Kansas City was nationally recognized, and after his death in 1950, the citizens sought to create a monument to his memory that would suitably pay homage to his vision. It was not until 1957 that the city officially took action to build the memorial to the late Nichols. Moved by the request of family and friends, Frank Tice, president of the Park Board, announced that the board had officially adopted a resolution favoring the construction of a Nichols fountain on Park Department lands. In December 1957, the location was officially approved, and the condition of the sculpture figure, which had been in storage at J.C. Nichols Company shops, was determined. Newspaper clippings on park records show the bronzes were missing a piece here and there. Actually, 11 parts of the group were missing and needed replacement, and one entire piece of the original 9 sculptures was missing. Miller Nichols hired architectural modeler Herman Frederick Simon, who had done the bronze doors for Kansas City City Hall and the Jackson County Courthouse, to make molds of all of the missing parts as best he could. Simon prepared the plaster models of the missing pieces, which then shipped to the Bruno Birzi foundry in Florence, Italy, who were hired to cast the bronze replacement. These photos are of the replacement piece of the boy and fish in the northeast quadrant of the fountain. Notice that the design details are not as elaborate as that of the other auxiliary pieces. The original bronze piece was purchased from the original owner Clarence McKay's son by Marjorie Singer, who lived in nearby Greenville, New York. It was with the Singer family for over 60 years, ending up in Delray, Florida. After his parents' death, Steve Singer, Marjorie's son, realizing he didn't have room for the 5-foot-long, 3-foot-high, 500-pound sculpture, Googled the artist's name he found near the base of the piece, and after hits on the name Henry Graber, followed by the J.C. Nichols Fountain in Kansas City, he contacted the city, and research and negotiations began. Kay Callison, granddaughter of J.C. Nichols and daughter of Miller Nichols, located a document among the Nichols Company papers in the Western Historical Manuscript Collection titled Cost of Fourth Dauphin and Children. It establishes that the missing piece was among those that had to be reproduced. The job cost $2,417.40, including freight and customs. Jocelyn Ball Edson, landscape architect for the Kansas City Parks and Recreation Department, went to view the sculpture in Florida and found it in sound condition other than some corrosion. Park officials agreed to buy it for $28,000.
It was crated up and shipped to Kansas City, where it was reunited with the rest of the J.C. Nichols fountain after the fountain went through major restorations, including repairing, cleaning, waxing, and coating the statues with patina. Also, the fountain's interior was repaired and waterproof coating was applied. Damaged coping stones around the fountain were also replaced. This major restoration was made possible by the Miller Nichols Charitable Foundation, which provided much of the funding, along with donations from Water's Edge Aquatic Design, J.E. Dunn Construction, and Grunfuss Pump Corporation. As for the fourth dolphin replacement piece, it's on a pedestal on display near the rest of the Nichols fountain. On Fountain Day, April 14, 2015, Kansas City's most loved, photographed, and visited fountain has again become a beacon for all of Kansas City and its visitors.
Bernard Powell said many years ago, ghetto or gold mine, the choice is yours.